Welcome to this Web Extra segment of The Line. I'm here with our Line Opinion panelists, taking on another issue in the headlines this week. This one has to do with access to local news. We got word that the Mountain View Telegraph is shutting down after 15 years. The closing came as a bit of a surprise and has us wondering about the impact of local communities as more and more small news outlets fold up shop. Eric, a couple of ways to look at this. A blow to democracy, certainly, and that's the obvious one. A blow to the marketplace, a place for advertisers to do their thing, to get business. Were you surprised by this? I mean, my understanding is the Telegraph was a pretty well-loved paper over there in the East Mountains. They did well. Estancia, they covered local news, and it still didn't work. You know what I mean? That's the frustrating part here. What's your sense of it?
Well, I think it's obviously a phenomenon across the country, and it's really, I think, especially for these small local communities who want to have a real connection with their media, it's becoming harder and harder for these local newspapers to survive. And I think it's tragic, and it also speaks to the dilemma we have in media consolidation and the effects that social media certainly are happening on where people get their news. People were very connected to that.
Right.
And there was the Tribune, back in the days of the Tribune, was still seen as sort of our local paper. Not many people see the Journal as their local paper. I certainly don't. It's a statewide paper. So I think it is tragic, but it speaks to a larger concern I think that we should all have about media consolidation and this kind of growth of large media outlets and this sort of very kind of partisan bent that increasingly is becoming more prevalent in media across the board. So,
and I think it also affects us as consumers of media in other parts of the state. I mean, you look at these papers like The Optic and The Sun, breaking really big stories for New Mexico, and the Telegraph. And we in Albuquerque, we miss out on that news. The Journal doesn't have a beat reporter in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and so it really weakens all of our press.
What's your sense of, again, it's not an isolated community. I did a lot of work out there. I love the East Mountains, that whole area. It's just magical. Can the Journal actually do as credible a job, in your view? But they're going to be doing their thing out there. You know what I mean? Is it the same? Do they pick up the slack automatically?
Well, it won't be the same. It's just not like having reporters who are in the community, who know these stories, who've worked these stories a long time. And it wasn't too long after the acquisition, was it, that they folded? And
That's
so
right.
I don't know if the Journal intends to do
There might be an
coverage.
inside-y kind of a thing there we don't know about exactly, right?
That's right.
Laura, your sense of this one, big loss or just the way of the world, as they say?
I think it's a big loss. I mean, it is a way of the world, which is unfortunate, but it's a big loss for that community and for New Mexico in general. There was an opinion, an op-ed that about this issue of small local newspapers closing down and how that actually has an effect. A couple of economists or finance professors had actually written a paper about how that could have an effect on local finances, on government finances, because a lot of these local papers are the ones that keep the local government honest. And so
legal notices, all that kind of stuff.
Well, not just that, but also doing investigative reporting, where bigger publications like the Journal that's statewide wouldn't necessarily be picking up on something that happens locally in these small communities. I have clients all over the state, municipalities as well as school districts. And for a lot of them, that local paper is really important to find out what's happening. And some of them have now, in dealing with it, with the rise of the internet and the media consolidation issues, they've turned to having weeklies instead of dailies, or maybe only a couple of days bi-weekly.
3 out of 5 or something,
and so for them it could work, but even just the advent of the internet has affected the ability to print papers anymore. I found out through my work that the Santa Fe New Mexican does a lot of contract printing of the actual newspaper for smaller jurisdictions around the state. And it's interesting that there just aren't even that many commercial printers in the state anymore. There's only like 3.
That's
and
a good
that really
point.
affects people's ability to have an actual paper in their hands. And there's a whole generation that prefers to do that than to read it online. So we're really talking about a huge culture shift.
Interesting point. That printing thing, Eric brought up the Tribune years ago. That was when there was an effort to save the Tribune. Once folks found out how much it cost to start a printing press, that idea sort of went out the window, that's for sure. Dan, your sense of this as well. It's not just East Mountain, certainly, but any place in New Mexico that's got a little bit off the beat of the Journal sort of footprint. You know what I mean? It's a tough, you've got to have local news in those places. What's your sense of this one?
So I'm not going to reiterate the points everybody's made on the table. That are good points. I'm going to talk about something that's a little different, and that's the local sports coverage. I mean, these high school kids and the little leagues. I mean, I still get the Mountain Monthly from Cloudcroft where I grew up, and they write in-depth stories about the Cloudcroft Bears football team. I can tell you the Albuquerque Journal ain't writing anything about the Cloudcroft Bears football team unless something really, really bad happens. So it's not just the news portion of it. It's getting to see your kids out there. I mean, when my mom passed away and we cleaned out all of the stuff, the amount of newspaper articles that she had for me and my brother when we were in Cloudcroft, because they wrote stuff. They wrote. I'm not putting up with his hangry attitude. I get treated. This is. I want a hashtag about this. Yes, the police blotter was some of them. Thank you. That was my political career. We're talking about my young athletic career. Right. But no, I think it's going to be a huge loss. I mean, you go out to some of these smaller towns where they play 6-man football, and they got 12 kids in the school that play all the sports. That's right. The Journal ain't writing about them, and the Journal ain't writing about them ever since Representative Maestas' dad left, because he it's interesting. One of the stories my mom had, to kudos to Representative Mo Maestas and his dad. His dad wrote a big story about my brother and I when we were in high school, because he was the Albuquerque Journal reporter that went out to cover high school sports, and he made a point of getting out of the Emerald City and going to the hinterlands and writing these stories. And I think that the Journal and people like that will tell you they're going to step up, but we're constantly hearing about how they're shrinking the paper as it is. So what's going to lose is going to be those stories of interest. The politics, all of the government stuff, that's important. But I think it's also important to cover these human interest stories that you're not going to see anymore.
That's a brilliant point. I like that. That's very true.
Brilliant. I get that used a lot when people talk about me, Gene. Thank you. Thank you very much. Normally that's what Laura says about me.
Laura, thank you. We'll see you next time.